Greetings, sailors, and welcome to a replay of mine featuring a celebrity guest. Because in the Scharnhorst, at the top of the team there, we have a fellow CC by the name of JAMDEAR. Now, I don't think she's been a CC for all that long. I can't remember exactly when she joined as a CC, but there are so many people in the CC program these days that it's a little hard to keep track, even just on the English language side. But as it turns out, she is a fellow Brit. She streams herself, and I will be putting a link down to her stream in the description of this video. And this was a game where she was streaming, and we just happened to randomly get in the same game as her and be on the same side even. Now, I've left in this just the very start of the game, so you can see everyone saying their polite hellos to everybody. I think Fu actually is one of my patrons here, might recognise from my supporter video recently. He actually follows her, and I think is also a subscriber as well on Twitch. He's very generous with us warships type people, so yes. Anyway, enough buttering up Fu so he'll give me more money. Oh, did I say that out loud? Just ignore that part, Fu. Just ignore that part. So this is going to be not a particularly spectacular game for the New Mexico. It does show off some of the good qualities of the New Mex, although also some of the frustrating qualities of the New Mex as well. But primarily I picked this one out because it's going to be a really tight game, and there is some really nice team play at the end. And it's not just myself, Fu, and JAMDEAR, but there's also one other particular player that's going to end up being quite important. So I mentioned the New Mex has some slightly frustrating qualities. The gunnery is definitely one of them. The American battleships generally, and I was particularly reminded of this grinding up through the New York because I reset this line to take advantage of the double research points. The vertical dispersion's actually quite good. And if you could get people broadside, even with the New York's guns, you could sometimes land some really nice hits. But the horizontal dispersion is really quite spread out, and so you get anyone angling against you, even in a cruiser, you kind of feel lucky if you manage to land more than, say, 2 shells. So you really do want those broadside targets. And for situations where you don't have those broadside targets, life gets a bit frustrating. Quite apart from the fact that you have 14-inch guns. You do have a lot of them, but you know, you don't get the benefit of any kind of overmatching going on, at least not against other battleships. I did make a bit of a boo-boo in one of my recent games, one of my recent videos rather, where I was talking about overmatching. I think it was the Mainz video. Yeah, it would have been the Mainz video, and I mistakenly said the bow was proof against of the Hipper and the Eugen with their 27mm bow. I mistakenly said they were proof against the 15 and 16-inch guns, and of course that wasn't true. It was only 15-inch guns. But anyway, that's by the by. Sometimes my brain likes to get confused where numbers are concerned, as I'm sure many of you are quite aware by this point. We don't have a lot of ships on this flank, you may have noticed. They don't either. So, in theory, our ships on the other side are kind of balanced in terms of numbers, except we've got some slightly wacky things going on. Our Matsuki is, for some reason, making a play for the enemy cap. They do only have 2 battleships over there, and we're only facing 1 battleship on this side, so there is an imbalance in forces in that regard. And our team is not that well positioned. The Sinop seems to be charging towards the enemy. As I've said, the Tsuki has decided to go towards the cap, and for some reason the Guepard is following them. Just as a reminder, that doesn't have smoke, just as the Jaguar was firing out there doesn't have smoke. So it's not looking awful on that flank, but there's a setup there for things going very wrong, and it is starting to go wrong with that Sinop dying. So all that's left there now is the New York, as well as the 2 cruisers. And the New York, as I rediscovered when I was grinding through it, whilst the guns may sometimes behave reasonably well, the armour is not so good. It cannot take a beating in any way, shape or form. So in getting to the New Mexico, where suddenly the armour actually feels like it's doing something, this is a far sturdier ship than the New York, that at least was a relief. Sometimes the slow speed is still a bit of an issue though, but yeah, at least the armour works for you. At least when you get to the New Mexico, you suddenly feel like angling is something that you're going to get rewarded for doing, whereas with the New York, quite often you would be, in your own mind, fairly well angled, and then you'd get some nasty troll penetrations from bigger guns happening anyway. Sometimes not even bigger guns. Sometimes it'd be other 14-inch gun battleships that would pen you in ways you wouldn't expect. So yeah, the armour on the New York, not so good. Not so good at all. So it's me keeping an eye on what's going on the other side. The York was able to withdraw. I think we lost the Helena, and the New York isn't going to last. They're just not fast enough. One of the other enemy top tiers, I mean, we know that the Scharnhorst was around here and has backed off a bit. Well, the Nagato came over here as well. But they kind of decided to hug the flank for some reason, and despite the Scharnhorst backing off, despite their only backup being a Farragut, they have decided to plough on down the flank regardless, and now we're able to just focus them quite nicely. The Guepard died, by the way, while this has all been happening. The Matsuki has been forced out of the cap and is now being chased by half the enemy team. But in a weird way, that's actually going to work for us. Although not so much the Montecuculi that decided to go down the middle and has also just been trashed. But the fact there are now so many ships chasing after that one Matsuki is going to give us a bit of a breather to reposition and get back across to the cap. Because whilst JAMDEAR and, well, really everyone else here... Well, actually, having said that, Fu does have a few knots on me in the Graf Spee, but only a couple. It's, what, 26 knots? It's not exactly a speed demon. Yeah, it will give us time to get across, because not all the enemy ships have turned back. If they'd all continued just to come towards the cap and say that cruiser and the Scharnhorst had dealt with the Fubuki probably still would have died all the same. But because it's the Udachi, the enemy Zara, and what is that? I can't remember. Normandy, there we go. Couldn't quite make it out on the video preview, but I suddenly remembered what the other battleship was, so my brain came to the rescue. Yeah, more ships have gone back than needed to, and so it's basically a pair of cruisers and a Piotr Veliki. So we've taken out the Nagato, we've taken out the Farragut. Jam has taken a heavy battering during all this. I mean, she got focused fairly hard early on, as I guess one of the first ships spotted. Unfortunately, that does tend to happen sometimes. You get seen first and everybody decides to turn their guns on you. So, yeah, she's hurting for health a bit. But fortunately, I am not. It's been a silver lining for me, because whilst she took a heavy battering and her Scharnhorst isn't looking so great right now, I comparatively am doing pretty well. I've got hit points to burn, and I'm going to need them if we are to bring this back, because the Matsuki's died, and now, although we have a bit of a break, you know, we're going to have those other ships to deal with, but we have a bit of a break between the different waves. The Normandy did actually turn around, and it's fast enough to have gotten here in time. So we've got 4 ships to deal with right now, and then we'll have another 3 ships to deal after that. And all we've got left is, well, all of us that went on this flank and that surviving York. Now, the York is going to try a really risky thing. I'm not sure why they do what they do exactly. They could have played with their range a bit, because the York does have decent range, but instead they're charging towards this group of enemy ships. It's not going to be in vain though. I mean, it's a group of lower tier ships, and the Veliki might struggle to do significant damage against a bow-on York. And bear in mind the York does have a pretty nice set of torpedoes available. It's still that usual set of German 6-kilometer torps, but you get to put out 8 of them per side. Now they've put out 1 spread, and I've just killed that Montecuculi, which is going to help out the York a bit. And there we go, there's a nice citadel on the Piotr Veliki as well, which shows that, you know, sometimes it can happen. Generally speaking, I was not ever having monster damage games with the new mechs, but it can happen. It's just a bit RNG dependent. But yeah, the Orc unfortunately has died to the Königsberg, and while they are lovely and stationary, yeah, my guns are just being a bit troll right now. I'm actually kind of holding back a bit on just blasting them with all the guns, because I think maybe one of my, I'd be able to save one and they'd actually hit and I'd be able to get the kill. But no, as it was, I fired all 4 turrets and got, like, what was it, 1 overpen, 2 overpens? These are not reliable guns. They are absolutely not. The armour is lovely on the New Mexico, but the guns, yeah, not so much. You do still sometimes get decent hits, though. It's just kind of a rarity. And that really does follow through to the Colorado a bit as well. I say, having just finished that grind today to get to the North Carolina. When the guns hit, they're lovely. And I've actually got a replay of the Colorado from that grind, where it wasn't monster damage, but it was one of those rare games where the guns just behaved so well. And it just doesn't happen very often in the Colorado. But you have at least the 16-inch guns to play with. They're so meaty that when they hit, they do some real nasty damage. So the Zara's pressed up through the middle, and they're not exactly evading very much, or angling particularly well. So this is, again, going to be my guns trolling me. But I also kind of screw myself a little bit here in that I'm getting greedy for the kill on this Normandy when they're clearly just burning out. And so I fire, but yeah, it doesn't actually matter. The fire kills them before my shells can get to them. Also taking a bit of damage from that Zara, and I have to say, more from playing against them than playing them so far. The SAP shells, when you're in a battleship, are not to be underestimated, especially if you're giving broadsides. You can lose 5-6k chunks of health quite easily. And even though the rate of fire isn't that amazing, if they are allowed to keep taking those chunks of health off you, it can rack up. It absolutely can. So you don't have to worry about ever getting set on fire, but it's like giving broadside to, an Akizuki with IFHE or something, and they're just pummeling you over and over. And initially you think, oh, this is fine, they don't have maybe a particularly high fire chance or whatever. But then you notice your health is just melting away, even if they don't set fires. So that's how my guns behaved. Killed off the Stores, nice broadside shot. The Yudachi is the big question mark right now. Everyone's assumption was, or mine certainly, that they were going to come back up the eastern flank. That would kind of have been the logical thing to do. Or maybe come through the middle. But as that smoke cloud reveals, what the Yudachi actually did do was basically circle all the way back round alongside the Stores and the Scharnhorst, the enemy Scharnhorst. No idea why, but it means they aren't particularly a threat to us. So suddenly the worry about the Yudachi has gone down rather a bit, especially considering they smoked up there. That's a bit odd. That's not even smoking themselves into the cap. Maybe they smoked there thinking they would be within gun range of people, but evidently they aren't. So yeah, that might just have been a mistaken smoke. Who knows? It might have been fat fingers on the keyboard. It happens to me sometimes. So a bit more damage from the Zara, but the Scharnhorst has been largely ignoring me and firing at, well, partly Fu, but also JAMDEAR, and yeah, she's pretty low health by now. And in fact, you can get a glimpse of it just there. And oh, there's some torps going past. So that is the Yudachi with, attempting to make a drop. But it looks like it was more a drop aimed at Fu than me, which seems a slightly weird choice. Now they're finally moving into the cap as well. But yeah, Jam, at this point, well, she's still firing. I think this is... and there we go, she's died, unfortunately. But I think at this stage, I guess she had the desire to keep doing damage, to keep helping, because this is really on a knife edge. We've managed to get ahead on points, but it's close. But looking back, you know, in retrospect, I think we can say with that amount of hit points, it would have been better just to hold fire and to go unspotted. And yes, it deprives us of the firepower of her Scharnhorst, but we've gone back to being very close on points again. And we're now down to just about 2 minutes. So, yeah, in retrospect, possibly not the best decision, but you can understand her intentions there, I think. Wanting to keep firing, wanting to keep doing damage, and try and kill stuff, because we need to kill stuff to win this. There's 3 versus 3 now. We've closed the gap both in ships and points, but they are capping us, and well, that therefore then means we're not getting any ticking victory points. And if they overtake us and nobody manages to get any kills in the next minute and a half, that's going to be pretty bad. That's unlikely, however, as the Scharnhorst, the enemy Scharnhorst, is now themselves looking very low health. I'm not having a lot of luck with my 14-inch guns though, and I'm actually switching now to HE. And I probably should have switched to HE a lot earlier than this. I think my angling is fairly good here though, and against those 11-inch guns, certainly my only real kind of danger zone would be to sit completely broadside, at which point, you know, that could be nasty, especially with the Scharnhorst rate of fire. But as it is, I'm angling, it's fine, and we also get a real stroke of luck with that Yudachi opening fire for some reason, giving their position away and letting me get the reset. So there's no danger of us being capped out. We're down to now less than a minute. In fact, we're rapidly approaching 30 seconds. But the Emile Bartin is about to get the kill on the Scharnhorst, which puts us ahead by, what's that, 80 points. And we'll actually switch to Fu for the dying seconds of this. We're going to see that Zara, who was so very much bang to right so many times with my guns, finally get their comeuppance. As Fu finally gets some good RNG with his own often quite unreliable guns. It's not known for its reliable gunnery, the Graf Spee. So just shy of 80k damage, which is not terrible. I mean, it's not brilliant. This was never going to be a replay I picked out on damage alone. But as you'll see from the, here we go, the team list, it's basically all the survivors that are at the top easily, and JAMDEAR actually in first place with just over 1500, in fact just under, we might say, 1600, not far off 1600 base XP. So it was a pretty nice result. All the players left at the end there were really more or less doing the right things, pulling their weight. That Bartin especially, having the extra firepower was useful, and the York, whilst they chose the super risky option, they did take a relatively high health battleship down with them. So in terms of victory points, you know, we came out ahead from that exchange. It might have been better to have the York alive for longer, but as it was, between everybody sticking together, playing well together at the end there, and the inexplicable decision of that Yudachi to, well, first off, not take the faster route to get back to the action, to follow their own team all the way around, and then not really be a threat. You know, we had that weird smoke. It's not like they were trying to smoke the Zara. That could have been a problem for us. It's not like they were actively trying to maneuver to take torp pot shots at us. Excuse me. And of course then they opened fire and let me get the reset, so yeah, I don't know what was going on with that Yudachi, but it all just came together to make for what was quite a tense, close game, and an enjoyable win, because for a big chunk of that it looked like we would struggle badly to win it, and that it was probably going to be a loss. But just the combination of everything happening, even that Matsuki doing the ill-advised run through to their cap pulled away enough ships. There were enough enemy players that made a poor decision in that regard that then worked in our favour. So yeah, there was lots of things going on in that match. It was quite an interesting one. So hopefully you found this replay interesting, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.